Now this section is kind of an optional section. This only applies to if you're playing a Voltron commander that has blue in its identity. So when it comes to counterspells for the Voltron player, you have to remember that you're not playing a control deck. So you want the counterspell to do one of two things. One, it either stops the combo player from going off using, let's say, sorcery instance, or you have a counterspell that does something in addition to countering the specific said spell. So a good example of a time when you would want to use a counterspell is when they have, let's say, a targeted removal on your commander on a specific key piece, or they have a board wipe. So for the former, there are also options such as any redirect type effects, which means you can change the target of that spell or ability to another target. Now I really like this because usually it costs about like 2 mana to play it. So not only do you quote unquote counter the spell, but you take its effect and you push it onto a different permanent type. So that way, instead of paying 2 mana to counter something, you're paying 2 mana to counter something and push it into something else. So that would benefit you more. So for board wipes, you also want to have like counters for those. In addition though, for non-blue players, you have ways to deal with board wipes as well. So if, let's say, you have red and white, you can run Boros Charm, all your permanents gain indestructible. If you have green, you can run Heroic Intervention, all your permanents gain hexproof and indestructible. So these are 2 cards I really like to run if you have Naya color inside your combination. I would also include the counter spells into the spot removal category, so the previous section that we spoke about, because once again you're using it to deal with specific scenarios that your opponent is trying to run, specific cards your opponent is trying to run. So once again, you're not a control deck, you don't have to run that many counter spells. I'd say that if you have some specific, like just a counter anything type of spells, you could run maybe about 2. And then if you have a counter and do something additional, you could run another 2. So in total, if you have blue in your color pie and you are running Voltron, 4 would be the optimal number of counter spells that I would consider. And then the rest would be dealing with all other permanent types. An example of a good counter spell that pretty much hits everything and shouldn't cost way too much is Swan Song. And I believe Flusterstorm also got reprinted, but if that is slightly above too much budget, you can go for any 2 mana counter spells. So the counter spell itself or negate could be those 2 slots if you're on a budget. And then when it comes to higher up the curve, the highest mana cost counterspell I would run would probably be Mystic Confluence, because it also doubles for card draw as well as bouncing your opponent's creatures, stuff like that. And then the one after Mystic Confluence, probably Cryptic Command if you could afford it. But if not, there are also other counterspells in that mana range that do something else. I think it's called Insidious Will, which allows you to counter a spell, copy a spell, or redirect a spell. So even though it's 4 mana, it costs a lot, mana wise, but the card itself is cheap financially. The fact that it gives you the option to have that kind of flexibility makes it worth these to be considered if you are on a budget. And then finally, for board wipes, it will be good to note that it's more important to run creature board wipes versus like artifact wipe or enchantment wipes. So the staple of the format I would say is Wrath of God. So anything that's in that CMC would be good. So Wrath of God, Damnation. Now these 2 are rather more on the expensive side, so you could also have access to, let's say, Day of Judgment, much cheaper, Shatter the Sky. And personally, I like to run one-sided or rather asymmetric board wipes. So any type of wipe that eventually leaves your commander alive but destroys everything else. So let's say if you have a high power, you can run something like Chandra's Ignition, which deals damage equal to the creature with the highest power usually, and it hits all creatures and all players except, all your opponents. So if you have the biggest creature on the board, it wipes out everything except that. There are also other wipes that do something similar to it. It's not very obvious at first, but there are definitely some. And for the board wipe category, I wouldn't run anything above 5 CMC because most of the good ones are at 5 CMC, 4 CMC, and 3 CMC when it comes to board wipes, with very few exceptions, not limited to Cyclonic Rift, and also something like a Dimension Breach, which exiles all permanents and returns 1 permanent back on each upkeep for every single player. So this pretty much concludes each of the different sections when it comes to the deck building aspect of Voltron. So stay tuned to the next section where we are going to talk about how to play the different types of Voltrons that are available out there for us. Catch you soon.